the almighty Supra. For most of the time that GT7 has been around, the Supra has been at the very least a viable option pretty much everywhere. But, more often than not, it's far too powerful. This week at the Red Bull Ring is no exception. 94 of the top 100 times for the daily race are the Supra, and nearly every race in the top split will be absolutely lousy with Supras, but perhaps it's in the heart of that Supra that we can find an alternate with a bit more soul and a bit more style, depending on who you ask. In my usual effort to find a counter to the meta, I started with the M6. Not only can I represent my team, Samantha Tan Racing, the car itself is generally a good anti-Supra and a powerful all-arounder. Unlike the last time we had this combination, we don't have to deal with a standing start, so the advantage the MR's had is dulled a bit. This was the first race of the day. I wasn't warmed up at all, but the M6 quickly proved to be a formidable weapon against the almighty Toyota. V-Diesel, who's starting behind me, is one of the best drivers in the region, and he really likes to drive the really off-meta cars. He likes to drive really slow cars, and because he's so good, he can generally get away with it. Seeing him start in the Z4, I thought that he was probably going to be able to do pretty good, but I was definitely in for quite a surprise. Turn 1 at RBR is sketchy on its own. I imagine if any of you have done this race this week, you've caught at least one penalty on T1. Per race, probably. And even if you manage to keep it between the lines, the bumps can unsettle any car. Combine that with cold tires and a slow entry speed that isn't practiced enough, and you've got a recipe for disaster. And as you can see, I just barely averted disaster right then. Given the fact that I was going slow, 1, to just be extra careful, and 2, to avoid that Ferrari, I wasn't too surprised to see V-Diesel on my tail, but I was pretty surprised to see that he was able to stay that close even mid-corner, especially on that super dangerous and super difficult corner. It was kind of funny that he hit me right as I apexed because it was exactly what I needed to get away from him, and that was definitely not the last time I was about to see him. I don't think we could have choreographed a better bump time than that. And luckily for me, he got in a little bit of a battle, so I was free to just chase the guys down, who I luckily had slipstream from. Late on Sunday nights, I like to test out the new combinations of the week, and I try to find different cars that could potentially be anti-meta cars. I pretty much assumed that this would not be viable because I thought it was actually too powerful, so I didn't spend any kind of time in it. I spent some time in the Porsche, and I spent some time in some other cars, but I had initially settled on the Porsche to be the anti-meta. The unfortunate thing about the Porsche is I don't spend nearly enough time in it. So despite the fact that I was pretty certain that it was going to be the anti-meta car, I decided to jump in the M6 because I'm very, very used to this thing, and it wasn't going to take a lot of brain power for me to get this thing around the track. As I was attempting a pass on Dragon Force right here, I was tempted to think that maybe the Porsche wasn't powerful enough, considering the fact that it had slipstream and I was almost able to keep up with it. I was able to brake later, and even though I was going to be able to give him space, I think he just wanted to let me go and not lose too much time battling me. Since he didn't put up much of a fight, I was able to keep up my momentum through that corner, and I still had slipstream from our friend Lumpy Melon ahead. At this point of the race, I didn't actually realize that Vin Diesel was right behind me. He was already all the way next to Dragon Force, and it wasn't until I saw him in my rear view right there that I realized that he is actually all the way in front of Dragon Force now. He managed to get by all the people he was battling and pass all the same people I did, and he's even closer to me now than I was close to Lumpy Melon. At this point of the race, I just chalked it up to Diesel being Diesel. The dude's fast in anything, absolutely anything, so my alarms didn't really sound off just yet. Jumping forward to the end of the lap, you can see that I was very happy with the M6, considering the fact that I had the fastest lap of the race so far, but that didn't last very long, because as you can see, our friend Luis took that from me immediately. As you can see, the danger of T1 is very real, and those two were just the latest victims, and that meant that I was now in 5th place. And shout out to Lumpy Melon for shaking his butt at me. Absolute pervert over here. If you've watched my anti-meta guide this week, then you know that I did ultimately choose the Porsche, and this right here is exactly why. Just look at that thing absolutely fly out of that corner. That corner is difficult on its own, but the Porsche can do the exact same thing when it's passing other cars. If you haven't watched that video, I do suggest you watch it, especially if you're looking for an alternate to the Supra. Jumping to the end of that lap, and you can see once again that the Porsche is proving to be a very, very good super killer. Worrying that these two might end up colliding or at the very least slow each other down, I decided to just slot in behind our friend Plaka and try to use their slipstream on this upcoming straight. If you remember from a couple years ago, the car that he's in was actually the meta car, and unfortunately they've completely nerfed the WRX in favor of the BRZ, so it's very rarely viable now. It was actually really cool seeing him right behind Lumpy, being able to catch up with him and actually leave me in the dust coming out of T1. T2 was doing the same, and so it was about now I realized that I'm probably going to need to pull off some kind of undercut in order to make anything happen with this car. As I was still getting used to the car, one of the hardest things to deal with was the dirty air. Despite the fact that we usually have a custom slipstream available that lessens the effect of the dirty air is still there, and so I got myself a nice penalty. The very best thing you can do if you are at a position where you can take a pit stop is to go in the pits directly after serving the penalty. And while I was thinking about that, I decided to go in the pits when I got the penalty instead of serving it, so that was kind of a bit of a glitch in the brain. And luckily for me, it didn't have any lasting consequences. Despite the fact that I had to serve a half-second penalty on my outlap on my undercut strategy, it didn't seem to affect me too much because I was able to stay within Plaka's slipstream. And because of that, I was able to get all the way up next to him. Now, Plaka is a very smart man. Usually, if he realizes that other people might have faster pace, he'll just let them go because he can ultimately work with them, and of course, we can just battle at the end if we so choose. If we battle too much right now, especially since we're both trying to pull off an undercut, it's going to completely ruin the undercut. So he just gave me the position and we were off. As we were approaching the end of that lap, it became pretty obvious that almost everyone that was in front of us was someone that we had already passed, which means that the undercut was actually working. If they hadn't gotten to the pits by this point and we're trying to finish the lap right here as they go in, that meant we were definitely going to end up in front of them by the time that they came out of the pits. Already feeling really good about the fact that the undercut was so incredibly successful, I also had the fastest lap of the race. A 127.7 without very much slipstream is pretty good for a non-Supra. It was also at about this time that I realized that Vin Diesel was right behind us and he was actually gaining. He didn't quite have the full slipstream, but at 1.2 you get a little bit of that slipstream effect. Noting the time between us, I entered the next corner hoping that it would at worst be the same, but hopefully the delta would be a lot bigger. And as you can see, it was not. Trying not to get too worried, I knew I had to just nail every corner and focus on my own race, but I was well aware that you would have the slipstream advantage. As I finished that lap, not only did I manage to keep him at about the same distance he was, I also realized that G2 EV was actually way behind when it came to the end of the pit cycle. This was our win to lose, and now the pressure was really building. In a situation where I'm not exactly sure what the anti-meta car is going to be, and I was driving one that could potentially be that car winning from 11th place, or maybe even further back, I can't actually remember exactly where we were, the pressure was really on at this point. Completely missing that apex, oversteering and losing momentum up that hill was definitely not the thing I should be doing, and that led to him being only a half second behind us. At this point, I'm trying to reason with exactly what was going on. The Z4 has not been competitive since about the very first month or two of GT7. I believe it's been nerfed multiple times since its glory days, and as far as the manufacturer Bape goes, PD generally only keeps one car per manufacturer fast. It appears we had an outlier situation. As I was going through the course, I was trying to pay attention to the delta, and I did notice that going through this section, about this left-hander through the end of the lap, I had a bit of an advantage. I don't think it was because of my driving. I think it's entirely based on the cars. But at the very least, at the end of this lap, I did manage to put some distance between myself and Drifter. I realize now I've not been very consistent about what I'm calling him. V Diesel is obviously a tribute to the Fast and the Furious character. His name is VQS Drifter. He is an incredible driver. I haven't seen him in the competitive races very much, but I'm actually really happy to see him in the daily races. I recall at this point thinking that perhaps I was just driving worse than I realized in the last lap, and the distance I was able to put between us in the last sector of the previous lap was what I could expect. That hope was destroyed pretty much as soon as I exited T1. With Drifter approaching at an incredible rate, I remembered how much faster he was on turn 2 in the previous lap, so I planned to defend into the next corner and hope I could hold it through the final sector and we could play this game the next 2 laps. But then... with Drifter fading away in my rear view, my victory was all but assured. If I could avoid penalties, which is the hardest part of RBR, and I could avoid any big mistakes, I should be able to pull off a solid anti-meta win and have my work done for the day. Unfortunately, just one corner later and he had already cut out a 10th from the distance that I had put between us. Despite the perceived superiority of this car through the final sector, Drifter was still just 1.2 seconds behind. I did not take T1 as well as I wanted to, and it appeared that Diesel absolutely did. He was now closing in even faster than he was before. While it had become pretty obvious that the Z4 was pretty formidable, I wasn't quite sure the extent of the power of the car, and I don't think I had quite experienced what it was like having the car solidly in my slipstream, especially after he got a really phenomenal exit. What was once a 1.2 second gap was now only 0.8 seconds, and by the next point we were going to hit the brakes, that had diminished down to almost 0.6. I try to remind myself that I had survived him being only a half second behind me at one point, but that was of course because he made a mistake. If I kept it clean and he kept it clean, then he would still be able to get all the way in front of me. Once again, I was relying on the last sector of the track to keep me safe and keep me away from him. I'm not sure if it was due to my tires being dead or his tires coming to life at this point, but the perceived advantage I had in the final sector no longer existed. Drifter was actually catching me at what I thought was my only strong point, and I did not know if I was going to be able to hold on. But then I hadn't realized that Drifter had gotten himself a penalty, and that made the gap once again about 1.2 seconds. Through nothing but dumb luck, I was able to stay away from Drifter and actually pull off this win. I guess it's a bit of a spoiler because we still have 2 corners, but I did win. This made me realize that the M6 was absolutely not going to be good enough to be the anti-meta car. That, or I just really needed to drive it better. But it did seem like the Z4 had a massive advantage, especially when it came to turn 2 and the slipstream. Now, as you may know from the thumbnail, this is actually a video about the Z4, and it's not the anti-meta car because it ended up being a little bit too tough to use. But Drifter showed what could be done with it, and I want to show what I was able to do with it. If you're a car person at all, you're probably well aware of the memes about the Supra. Anytime you see a Supra anywhere on social media or even in real life, haters will quickly say, "Oh, you mean the Z4?" But since when is having BMW power not a good thing? I do find it ironic that I was able to use the heart of the Supra to defeat the Supra, but even more than that, the Z4 is important to me and beloved by many in the community. In GT Sport, the top cars and manufacturers were well known, but at the beginning of the first season of GT7, it wasn't quite clear what the best cars were going to be. I chose BMW just because I love BMWs and the Z4 seemed pretty good. In the very first manufacturer's exhibition season in GT7, round 1 was Group 3 at Suzuka, and I managed to qualify in second place only to Igor Fraga. I ended up placing very well overall that season, and when I posted my results, it led to an offer to join Samantha Tan Racing, which definitely changed my life, so the Z4 will always hold a very special place in my heart. Enough about that though, let's see what this car can do in Daily Race C. Despite the fact that I thought that Grove would probably be able to get all the way around Bigo, I always worry about following someone on the outside of a corner, and that is exactly why. Bigo made a bit of a mistake, and that pushed Mike almost entirely off the track. I didn't mean to collide with Bigo, but I was afraid I was going to run into the back of Briscoe Biscuit, and all of that led to me getting all the way to 9th place after being in, 12th place right before that last corner? With a Supra behind me and a Supra in front of me, I didn't think I was necessarily going to be able to pull away, and I thought I was going to have to work for it at the very least, but I think that everyone behind me ended up fighting, so that meant I could just focus on trying to catch the group ahead, which, of course, had a tail-end Supra. Not only did Nasty have the Supra, Garth in front of him also had the Supra, so they were definitely going to be able to work together, or at the very least provide Nasty with some slipstream, so I thought it was going to be a little bit before I caught them, but I found myself only 7/10ths behind him at the beginning of this next lap. With everyone so bunched up ahead, I assumed there would be incidents, but even without incidents, they would most likely slow each other down to avoid said incidents, and then I could see what the Z4 was really like in the slipstream. While I did have a good amount of that slipstream, I was still 6/10ths back, and Nasty was only a 10th or 2 behind the people in front, so I definitely wasn't going to be able to go faster than the meta car in those situations. If you recall from the last race, Drifter was extremely fast in the Z4 on this turn right here. And this is when I really realized why. With soft tires, the usual understeering nature of the Z4 turns into stability, allowing you to rotate easily and get on the power without any issues. It's amazing how the different cars can transform depending on the tire compound. Some cars are actually more squirrely with soft tires because the front tires seem to have too much grip on corner exit, while the Z4 seems to absolutely shine. I think because of the usual handling weaknesses, the Bape has been balanced to give it just enough power to not be crazy on its own, but an absolute rocket in slipstream. One thing I should mention is that we do have the custom slipstream, which of course makes the dirty air not quite as dirty as it usually is. I think with the normal slipstream and the normal dirty air, this car probably wouldn't be quite as viable, but I do think it would still be pretty good. At the beginning of the part of the track that I thought I was going to struggle on, I was right on Andre's bumper. And right here at the end of that struggling sector, I was still 3/10ths behind him, but that meant that I was in prime position to pull off some moves going into T1 or T2, or maybe even T3. As soon as I saw Garth and Andre move to the side to try to pull off some moves on each other, I knew that I was in for something special. I always try to aim for the inside to make sure that anyone who collides or slides off isn't going to be in my way if I get a really good exit, and I did get a really solid exit. Despite the fact that these guys didn't really collide, they just kind of went a little bit slower than they should, and that's just because they were battling. In this situation, I had to put myself in the left because I was pretty sure that Evan was going to go for a pass, but since he didn't, and I saw that Andre was going to be right next to Garth as they apexed, I decided to go all the way from the outside to the inside and try to follow Andre. Because of the fact that Garth wasn't going to be able to close the door because Andre was there, I was going to be able to fit myself there, and due to this car's incredible grip coming out of that corner, I knew that I was going to be able to stick with Andre and get all the way in front of Garth, which is exactly what happened. With all the time I spend researching what cars could possibly defeat any of the various meta cars, I learned a lot about the various characteristics of pretty much every single car in the class. The Aston Martin V12, for instance, is incredibly good coming out of corners. It usually handles pretty well, but it's kind of been bopped to death. It's not as strong as it used to, and the biggest issue that it's always had, the top speed, is definitely still there. Essentially, it's kind of like a worse performing Z4. Though I couldn't actually see the gap between Andre and Big Mike, it did look like Big Mike was too far away for Andre to get any meaningful slipstream, and I was right on Andre's tail. Being well aware of the Supra right behind, I wasn't going to try to pass Andre until after we make it past T1. As long as I can get a really good exit on T1, I should be able to use the slipstream from Andre, get enough in front of Garth that I'd potentially be able to pull off a move, but unfortunately, Andre really killed it on T1. And that's because he went a little bit over the line. On one hand, it makes a lot of sense to try to push Andre and just help him along because if he has a penalty, I'm going to get that position no matter what. But on the other side of that, it also makes sense to consider the fact that if he does have that penalty, he probably went over the line and he probably got the dirty tires, which is kind of just an on and off switch in Gran Turismo. I figured if I can cleanly get in front of him, then perhaps it would slow Garth down enough that Garth wouldn't be able to catch me after he served that penalty. I hadn't actually tried this before, but going into T3, having to stay on the outside and trying to brake deeper than Andre, I figured I could try to dip it down to first gear, kind of shift lock it a little bit and get it to rotate, then get on that throttle to balance it out and get that grip that the Z4 is known for, and that's exactly what happened. This car is so much fun to drive if you can figure out what you're doing, and it really is an absolute weapon. And so now, on the very young lap 4, I find myself toe-to-toe with the Supra, all the way in 5th place after starting in 13th, and there's no one else to bother us, no one here to affect what goes on between myself and the metacar. If the Z4 really is back and capable again, I should be able to catch the Supra with the aid of the slipstream, and if I can get to him before the slow sector, I can hop in the pits and try to make an undercut work, potentially even passing even more people. If you've been playing this game for a while, then you know that going beyond the curb on T1 can often result in dirty tires, but they've actually changed that. And while the tires do get a little slippery temporarily, by T2, all of that is gone. So if you can gain an advantage by using that extra bit of track, you should definitely do so. As if you needed any more evidence, the proof is on your screen right there. Purple Sector 1, when our boy Z28 has the fastest lap in the metacar, suggests we do have something special on our hands. Mike is very smart to defend here, as a dive from point 2 was never out of the question in GT7, but I knew I had to be both clever and patient. Setting up a dummy pass, I was never going to actually dive and hit him, so I took the normal line on the inside, and that did convince him to stay on the outside, assuming that I might actually run into him. Putting myself in the inside here, I was going to go for an actual pass. Rotating it on the apex, I was able to get all the way in front of him, and he did cede the position. With him slowing down a hard-charging Andre, who did manage to catch up to me, I knew that I was going to be completely free to go in the pits and potentially pull off something really special. After a solid outlap, I was finally going to be able to see what I was able to do with my undercut when Jack Namo started coming out of the pits. I did cut off 2 seconds from his lead, but unfortunately, I also gave myself a penalty. No matter what the metacar is, the greatest enemy on Red Bull Ring is always going to be the track limits. Leading to the penalty zone, I had cut 4/10 out of Jack's lead on me, but with only 4 laps to go after this, it wasn't looking likely that I'd be able to pull off anything at all. Leading into the final lap, I did manage to cut the distance between myself and Jack down to 1.7 seconds. If I had not gotten that penalty, I probably would have been in slipstream range. Maybe, maybe not. It's hard to tell, but a half-second penalty is usually worth more than a half-second. The Supra that we had passed just before going into the undercut was now nearly 6 seconds behind. As you may know, the undercut is also a bit of a double-edged sword. The advantage is really temporary. Going faster as soon as you come out of the pits, while they're still on the slowest part of their first stint, can lead you to getting in front of them by the time they come out. But if you can't get in front of the people that you're trying to get in front of, then that undercut probably won't work. They're going to have fresher tires, and in this case, Jack is a very good driver in probably the second fastest car, the second meta. I definitely didn't run a perfect race at all. You can actually see my lap 7 was 1 minute and 29 seconds. It should have been deep in the 127s, but I didn't hit a single 127 in my second stint. And I'm ashamed to say that it's probably because I was really distracted by chat, because I am streaming after all. I think if this were a 12-lap race, I would have been able to get a podium, but I am definitely happy to settle for 4th place after starting in 13th place in the Z4. It's been a very long time since I felt like it was possible to do absolutely anything in the Z4, and the fact that I feel like I could actually win given the right circumstances makes me feel absolutely amazing. I love the Z4, not only for what it did for me in GT7 and my sim racing career, but it's just a fantastic car. It also sounds really amazing, which is pretty rare for Gran Turismo 7. I hope that in future Bape updates, they keep giving a bit of love to the Z4, but even if they don't, we can always drive it for the memes. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this new kind of video I'm still trying to figure out. I really liked making this one, so you can expect more like it, and please feel free to give any kind of feedback. And as always, I'll leave you with a look at my current members who I love and adore very much. Until next time, be excellent to each other.